So good evening, it's 7 p.m. Skopje time and 6 p.m. and London time, and I'm really happy to have Stephen Mallinder with me. I'm really excited about having a possibility to spend some time with him, to talk about and to hear his lecture, and not only me, but all of you that are following us live through the Facebook page of Lokomotiva. The lecture on the subject Prefix-Repeat-Rewind, can the past help navigating the world of sound in a new age? So this is happening in the frame of a program called Music Culture of Lokomotiva Center for New Initiatives in Arts and Culture. And this program is part of a project called Program of Lokomotiva and Kino Kultura Project Space for Contemporary Performing Arts and Contemporary Culture. And practically with this lecture, we are closing this yearly program. Initially, it was planned to have Stephen in Skopje, and in partnership with PMG Recordings to have him in a double role, performing at the festival, but in the same time also having a lecture in the physical space in Kino Kultura. But unfortunately, due to these pandemic conditions and not having ability to travel, at least we can talk through digital means and tools that we will refer also in the lecture, or Stephen will refer in the lecture. So this program is supported by the Ministry of Culture of Republic of North Macedonia. And I will give a brief introduction, if I can do this with, let's say, small biography references of Stephen Mallinder, even though it's difficult to talk about a person having 50 years extensive professional experience, being a music author, composer, producer, publisher, broadcaster, journalist, but also a researcher, lecturer, and academic professor. So for many Skopje fans, but also all around the world, our probably first met with Stephen and his music and his being an author is coming from the Cabaret Voltaire from the very early 1970s in the 20th century. So with this very important and extensive influence of the contemporary electronic and popular music culture, with more than 30 albums that were, and also compilations that were published for very prominent labels such as Factory Record, Rough Trade, Virgin, Amy, Mute Records. He's also recording and touring extensively in Europe, USA, Japan, and Australia. And currently he has several music projects. This year with Wrangler, they had the 4th studio album, A Situation, and with the 3rd studio album, White Glue, we had opportunity and chance, and we were happy to have them in Skopje exactly 4 years ago with the concert in the Youth Cultural Center. This year, Stephen Mallinder also was reissuing his solo album Powwow, from initially recorded and published in 1985, and also last year he had the 2nd solo album Dada, The Creep Show and Mr. Dynamite, which was the album issued 2019, was something that, especially here, I would say for the Skopje context, and music lovers were very well received and acclaimed. But besides talking about Stephen as a musician and music author, he is also being very much involved in the video production and experimenting with sound and video in the same time, collaborating with many artists such as Mika Levy, Tash Tank, Jane Horrocks on many different projects. We had a chance also to hear your soundtrack on the tourist, and I really like what you did with the sound part of the project. His work were also presented, I mean, the early Cabaret Voltaire films in MoMA Museum. They're part of their collection, but also his work were performed at Tate Modern, Barbican Center. He is also very much involved in production of the music and recording, and also being, let's say, promoter and owner of several labels, including Double Vision, Plugsters, and Off Sounds. As a professor and lecturer, he holds PhD in music culture, and currently he is teaching at the Brighton University the students of BA and MA in digital music and sound art program. So this is very, very briefly, and I'm probably forgetting many other important things, but now maybe you can check his website on Blog Brighton AC UK and learn or be introduced with more of Stephen's authors and producers' work. And today, as I announced the name of the lecture, we will have a very interesting topic to discuss, as Stephen was put with his own words in the abstract, that personal exploration or of where we have come from and where we may be going. It will refer to the how changing ways of creating and transmitting music in the context of new technologies, communication platforms, social networks, and cultural economies are redefining the relationship between knowledge and power, and the way communities are created to a personal perspective as a performer, as an author, and as a lecturer. So, Stephen, I'm really happy having you here. I hope I wasn't much extensive in my introduction part, but the floor is yours. So Stephen will have his lecture around 40 to 50 minutes. And after that, we can have a short or about half an hour discussion. So you can pose your questions on the messenger, on the Facebook, under the stream. So we will have the questions here in Zoom, and Stephen can answer. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Violeta. That's I'm quite stunned, actually. That's a lovely introduction. I'm sorry I gave you so much to read. I didn't realise I'd done so much until you said all that, but I have been around for a long time, so it probably does explain it. So firstly, thank you to you. Thank you to Lokomotiva. And I'm sorry I can't be with everybody in Skopje. It would have been great. So please send my best regards to Mirkov as well, who was a big part of Wrangler coming out. And I know we've got a strong connection there. So as you say, hopefully it can come out next year and see you. But in the meantime, it was an opportunity to do part of what we were doing over there. So this was to have a chat and have a lecture, and hopefully, I'm not quite sure who's listening out there. So I hope I don't go under some people's heads and over some people's heads, and I hope it's not too boring. But I'm going to share the screen, so just bear with me one moment. And you can see my lap. There you go. You can see my desktop.
Yeah,
so I'll just pull the presentation. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, ask any questions later on, and I'll fly through this. Just to say that initially, sorry, I'm just flipping through. Great. Hopefully you can see my screen. Initially, I was going to kind of talk about a masterclass and talk about how I did things, but knowing what you guys wanted and what Violeta had chatted about, it was kind of nice to build in some of the, if not theoretical, some of the sort of things that I deal with when I'm writing, as well as when I'm making music. So this is a mishmash of things about the making of music, but also about the sharing of music and how, importantly, how we all connect and how that's changed. It feels like a rather pretentious title now I'm looking at it. not the first bit. That was really easy. I just nicked the title off my last Umdada album because it seemed appropriate, and then you needed an answer quickly. But can the past help us navigate in the new age? It seems very pretentious and a little bit new agey, so I do apologise for that. It wasn't intended as that, but hopefully you'll get the idea. I'm gonna go through a load of stuff and try and see if we can join the dots, see what there is in the experiences I've had and the times we've been through, and see how it parallels in a very different and a very unique way. And there's something, although I'm sorry I'm not in the room with people, this seems something incredibly appropriate about how we're talking, how I'm doing that. This is how we're starting to function a little bit more. So maybe there's a relevance to that. There you go. Anyway. I'll give a bit of framework for how I'm going to go through this, and I wanted to look at aspects of creating, about making music, and about how we share things. So for always there's kind of a framework around what I try and do, and in each situation it's about context, it's about the world in which we live. In this case, when I'm talking about the time in which we live, the times in which I've experienced and talked about these things, the space and the places in which we're from, which are ever changing, and particularly, and in reference to the next point, technology, how the space and place and time that we occupy is being massively framed by technology. The ideas of time and place are kind of collapsing. I'm reluctant to say they've collapsed and imploded in a digital world. They haven't. They're still incredibly relevant, and I think it's partly what I'm going to talk about. But they have collapsed in some respects due to technology. And really, it's about how it's not just about me. It's about how people respond creatively to that world. You know, creatively, the creativity part is the key to it. It's about how we make sense and how we represent the world in which we live. In whatever medium we choose. I'm talking mainly about sound and about music, but it's not just about that. And all those mediums now they're not mutually exclusive. There's no such thing. It's funny because I teach on sound art, and I don't really fully believe in the idea of sound art. I just think people create, and they use different tools and different mediums to make that, pull that together. So I'm going to be talking about how we creatively bring those things together. Important, it's about the message and the meaning. This is where we ourselves, as either individuals or groups, collectively kind of express ourselves with some relevance. I don't think that, you know, everything we do should have a message and it should have a meaning. It should be saying something, even if that is not massively overt. If it's not explicit, a message can be implicit in that. So it's really important. And probably the key to all of it is, and nowadays particularly, and how I'm talking to you, is through that idea of cooperation and collaboration and sharing stuff. So I'm looking at it very much how we do that and how we shared in the past that teaches us how we share at the moment. So, and also importantly, looking about, if all of this is about telling stories, there are multiple stories. And when we listen or see or look at something, we should know the narrative behind that. And that's multiple, and we should always question, you know, what the context is of that, particularly in the first place, the economic and the political ones are not on the top there, but we have to understand the world in which these things are framed. I've always seen what I've done and what we did as Cabaret Voltaire very much a journalistic thing, where we were absorbing, mirroring and feeding back the world in which we exist. So, and that political and economic thing, sort of aspect of it underpinned everything, how art and how music reflects the politics of the age it's in, the economics and the economic relationships of what we're in. I'm going to be talking about the 80s and also about now. What does that mean economically in terms of now how we work in a digital world economically? It's something that people try and don't avoid, but it's a difficult one for us to kind of comprehend how we work economically and how people relate economically, but also about how we connect socially and about the cultural forms in which it takes. So, and particularly, I think we need to look at how we create, not just, I'm talking about it as someone who's a musician and an artist, so we tend to talk very much about the first part of it, the idea and the production of that idea. But a lot of what we do, particularly now, and that's the point of this, is it's not about what happens in the production, it's about how those ideas and those things that we create are transmitted, how people receive them and in what context, and how we consume and share them. And the things that always underpin those for me are the technology which is creating and sharing, but also how we deal with ourselves, the past, the memory, what it means to our own identities individually and collectively through community. So it's really very much about that. And I'm probably going to start this whole thing the way it ends up, and that is how much the ghosts of the past inhabit us and inhabit the world in which we live now. We've not become separated from our past. We've absorbed it. We've written on top of it. We've drawn from it. There's a danger or a tendency to think that we've moved on, but so much of what we see now has come before us. So it's just a question of making those connections and joining those dots. So this looks a bit pretentious, but I suppose it was a question of going out, what do we all do? And these are some of the things that I guess as Violeta said, these are some of the things I've done: artist, producer, writer. I put provocateur, it should be provoker really, but it didn't kind of sound quite as sexy, so I put provocateur. I was tempted to actually not have that slide, and the slide just said maker, breaker and fucker upper. That equally describes the roles that we can play. The provocation part is really important, and that's what I was trying to do, or aiming to do today, is to actually not find solutions. I don't know solutions to these things. I'm trying to look at the way the world is and provoke ideas so we can look at ways of navigating it. So that's that aspect, but it doesn't refer just to me. It refers to all of us. And creativity is a really interesting thing, actually. Particularly, we are all creative, everything in our daily lives. There isn't such a thing as a non-creative person. Just because you don't paint, or you don't make music, or you don't make films, doesn't mean you're not creative. All of us have aspects of creativity about us, whether it's the way we dress, the way we put flowers in the way, whatever we do, there's a creative aspect to us. So I think we need to sort of acknowledge that and not see creativity and the idea of the artist as being this very exclusive thing. It's not. It's common to all of us, how we kind of show and share our aspects of ourselves, be it in the books we choose, in the pair of trousers we wear, in how the language we use is a creative process and everything. This slide is the elephant in the room, and it's kind of where it starts and where it ends. It's really about the two. I've put it as a binary. Basically, how much let's look at it in terms of music. What's changed? I came up in a world where the content, the actual artifact, the piece of music, the record, the piece of vinyl was important, CD, cassette. That's changed. It was all about the thing. Music, in my world, when I started, was a thing. It was something that was tangible, was something that you could actually pass on, that you could sell, there was an exchange value. That has very much been eroded. We need to look, and we'll look at this later, about how the economics and the exchange value of music has changed. But now it's about context, everything changing. It's about activity. And very much in some ways, we have to acknowledge that music is as much a verb as it is a noun. It's not so much a thing, it's more a thing that we do. And like that creativity, it's something we're all involved in. So I'm not coming down on either side. I'm just saying we have to accept how this has changed, how the content in the digital world, the object has vaporized. It's disappeared very much, not entirely. All right, so looking at my story, this is where I came from, time, space and place. This is Sheffield. And it was a place where I grew up, Northern England, industrial, but with this view, this look at the stars. Somebody said the other day, we're all looking up at the stars, but some of us are staring at the gutter or at the curb. So it's a little bit of that. I'll show you a little clip of the city that I grew up in. This was the world when I was a kid. Hang on, is it going to play? Oh, damn, it's not going to play. Oh, it is. There you go. I'll only show a couple of minutes of this. But this was the future.
The city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, all bright and glittering in the smokeless air. So William Wordsworth, poet of 200 years ago, wrote about London's Westminster Bridge as it was then. He might have been speaking of Sheffield today, for the city's smokeless air gives it a justifiable claim as one of the cleanest industrial cities in Europe, thanks to a smoke control policy started in 1959. Gone is the pre-war smoke and grime, even though steel making is still at the heart of the city's heavy industry. Steel, to be rolled, forged, pressed, built into our modern lives in countless essential ways.
I won't show any more, but you get the picture. That's the 60s. That was the world in which I grew up, where I was part of an industrial heartland, but also growing up at a time when the future was something to behold. It was something to, be optimistic and look forward to. Everything was very shiny. Everything had, you plugged it in. Everything was gadgets. Everything was new. Everything was about the domestication of technology, about the things in the home, and starting to, not in my case, but a few years after, it was about travel. It was about the capacity to move and go beyond where you were. It's about becoming, not being. And that was the Sheffield that I grew up in. That was the world I grew up in. So, but obviously that collapsed, that changed. I grew through the 80s and Margaret Thatcher, deindustrialisation, the collapse of the city and what it meant, massively changed that. So that was my learning. That was the place in time in which I grew up, and watching that collapse and what it meant. And that's the famous Western Works, which was knocked down probably about 20 years ago now. That's us inside, me, Chris and Richard. That's a picture from 1976 when we moved in there. The important thing was that we saw opportunity in that collapse. It didn't mean the end of the future for us. It meant spaces that we could occupy, that we could take over. It was a creative thing. There was a connection through that. The cities and these collapsing spaces offered us something to go and occupy, something to use, something to be creative. And if we flip forward to nowadays, these are photographs from kind of this week. This is the world in which we live, a face mask of COVID, of collapsing spaces, of new cities. But the interesting thing now is that those places that we were able to occupy and take over and create music in and put gigs on and things like that, it's different. I think these are imagined spaces now. We're living in a digital world. What's happened is everything's moved into this digital space. So that's really part of what it is. So how did we start? I'll quickly flash up. Obviously the name Cabaret Voltaire, we were inspired by a radical art movement, not really by music itself. We were inspired more by art, in that this represented a change, this represented a challenge. Dada, which happened 100 years ago now, was a response to a world in conflict, of world war, of industrialization, of this growing thing. That was their response. We kind of connected with that idea of a response. So it was important that you have triggers. We need triggers and we need inspiration. I think it still continues to be sort of an inspiration in many respects. And we learnt from artists and writers as well. We learnt the process of actually tearing things apart, rip it up and start again, which obviously a reference to Simon Reynolds' book and to Edwin's Orange Juice Tribe, but also about how we try to understand the world just as the Dadaists did, by repositioning everything, taking it out of its normal place. Art was moved out of galleries. Words were moved around. We learned process. That's how we learned the process. That was really important to us, for us at that time, to sort of recontextualize everything, and that still seems relevant today. We found ways of connecting in a world we saw no real kind of affinity with in terms of other people. For us, I think there was probably Throbbing Gristle and some of the people that were attached to industrial, so Monty Kazaza, people like Gavin from the Virgin Prunes, people we used to kind of communicate and talk like that, which is kind of really funny because it's very prescient in terms of how we connect nowadays. We share stuff on the internet, we share stuff through emails, but this was a way of creating art with people that were dispersed and sort of remote and in different parts of the world. And it was kind of a lesson that we learned that we're still kind of learning from today. That's the world. That world was physically remote. That world was physically distant. There were cultures and times and places that were so far away from us. It would take, 2 weeks for a letter to get from LA to us. Nowadays, we're living in this kind of a much more connected world, and this is the world in which we've got. I mean, I've flagged this up, obviously, Deleuze and Guattari's kind of Thousand Plateaus, the idea of multiple connected worlds, all these nodes, and that's the world in which we live. It's important that we understand how connection works now. We're very lucky in some ways to have these connections, but it's something that we need to be kind of mindful of as to how we do that. I also, the picture on the right is their neurons and dendrites. This is a nervous system. The relevance of that is that we're increasingly growing in connection with, well, we'll say it with artificial intelligence. So the idea that we're becoming connected electrically, electronically, digitally, and also on a neuron level, on an atomic level, we're working very closely. So that's where we shifted to from that. We wanted new ideologies. The importance of somewhere like Fluxus, what was happening after the Second World War, just like with Dada, was really important. The work of Joseph Beuys, of Namjoon Pak, people like that, which all of a sudden they were looking at revolution. They were looking at art not as patronage, but as a new form of expression in a post-war world that used new materials, that used new communities, that had a whole different ethos and ideological approach to how art was seen and how artistic communities were seen. So, I see parallels in what we do now and looking for the newer worlds and for newer connections. I'll kind of briefly sidestep to talk about this as how I use sound. I'm not so much interested in sound and music as it is. I'm interested in what it means and what it signifies. So I think, in respect to Jacques Attali and the idea of music and noise, that we use music to theorize, not about it, but through it. And that's how I started a lot of my research. My doctorate, which was referred to there by Violeta, is about the movement of rhythm through analog space and digital space. And I used rhythm, and the beat became a sort of an encoder of ideas. And my PhD, my research has looked at how the ideas of hip hop and techno and what happened with soul and what happened in places like Detroit, as well as what happened in Dusseldorf with Kraftwerk and people like that, how those ideas moved through the rhythms and how rhythms carried them, and how also when we reach a digital age, how those encoded ideas of music and ideas of encoded rhythms start to collapse and morph and fall into other things. So it was just a quick word about how my research and how I did that. So it'll help us understand a little bit. I'm going through, these are just connections that I kind of wanted to make. These are dots that I'm joining that will hopefully kind of act as a provocation for you guys. The important thing is really for me to understand that world in which we live, but it's to help us understand, we have to wind back a little bit and look at people who were there at the kind of in the embryonic stages of a new mediated world, massively mediated world. So I flashed up the Guy Debord and Society of the Spectacle, who was really looking at how the spectacle and the illusion and the mediated world was starting to overtake the reality of the world. It was all about the spectacle. It was all about the vision. It was all about the optics of that. And it was undermining what we were as people. And also Baudrillard, which I've probably got a far kind of close affinity with, in the sense that he predicted or saw how even 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, he could see how the world in which we live wasn't the real world. We were inhabiting a simulated world, a simulacrum, as he called it, in which the reality of the world was very much one projected through the media. And that really seems to be the basis of the world in which we live. You know, we've just come out of a world with Donald Trump as president. You know, we've still got Boris Johnson, so, you know, nothing changes, and there's sort of populists around the world. But when a TV show host, a reality TV shows can become ostensibly one of the most powerful men in the world, then we really are living in this simulated sort of world, and one that's removed one step from reality. We think we understand the world through how it's projected to us, and that's something we've got to continually deal with. We have to acknowledge that and face it head on, because that's how we kind of create, and that's how we bring that into what we're doing. So the question is, what is real? I think the important thing that we got to pull out of what happened in the past, and again drawing on sort of France and the post-structuralists and all this kind of stuff, and Paris and the riots, and how society and the world that the board was talking about needed to change. And I think that's something that we really need to sort of not bury. We need to look back at that. And, you know, as that image shows there, where women were important in this, or other people were more important. We have, you know, the destruction of this kind of white male patronage world is really important. So I see parallels in that with what's going on now. That's London and Extinction Rebellion that happened about a year ago. That's the world in which I kind of look towards to see how we can progress change. I showed that picture before about utopia being stalled, and it was, I suppose the point being was that the idea of the future around that time when I was growing up was everything was going to be fast, and everything was going to be shiny, and everything was going to be in outer space. It was utopian. And strangely enough, then the world shifted, and a lot of the visions of the world have become increasingly dystopian. Although now we sort of don't do that anymore, because the dystopian world that we may have projected for ourselves 20 years ago, we're living that. You know, we're living with, you know, a global pandemic brought about by climate change. We're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with all those issues with migration, with refugees and war. The world in which we pictured it is actually what we're living in. So the idea of a dystopian future is sort of gone, really. It's just a reality. But resistance is really important. And what I've learned from music is, you know, music's really important about how it still comes from those communities and those spaces, and we need to make sure we don't lose that. You know, I flagged up these things here. Our blues is about lived experience, soul and the sound of industry, hip hop and the streets, rave in hedonism, and also particularly EDM, which represents in some ways where we're at now, this corporate clubbing, this kind of neoliberal approach to sort of nightclubbing and music and the nighttime economy is something that, interestingly, I don't know how it'll come back after the pandemic. I guess we're going to have to see how that works. But I think we still need to see music and the people who make music as a way of challenging that. And it's important that music is a leader in those areas. So I'm kind of loath to sort of dismiss or diminish the impact of that. I grew up in the 80s, going back to that, about how I talked about the abandoned spaces that we took over to create studios in, but also, you know, these are photographs from places like, I'm trying to remember some of the clubs we used to go to. Dirtbox is one of them, Battlebridge Road. These are before the rave scene and before the 80s, but it was about how people got together and how people sort of used that idea of challenging authority by their own communities, by creating their own environments, their own worlds, their own micro communities and their own connections. And it was brought on by music. It was the forefront of resistance to things like blues clubs. you know, I was going to blues clubs in Sheffield when we were about 17, 18 years old, and the blues clubs being where Jamaicans had their illegal get-togethers, shebeens, and that it was where really good shit happened. The sus laws and brought on a massive kind of connection with music and what was happening in 70s and 80s. Things became very racialised. Race riots that we had in places like Brixton, in St Paul's, Toxteth, Handsworth, Chapeltown, all these places. Music was very connected with that idea of resistance. And I think we need to be careful about losing the tangible bits of music and what that means to us. Using this as a really kind of close, tight example was what happened with, the Criminal Justice Act, which Margaret Thatcher brought in, which was, or was it Thatcher? Yeah, amplified music, or wholly or predominantly characterised by emission of succession of repetitive beats, was used as a form of social control to actually stop people doing stuff. It had a massive reaction. It was a response to rave and acid house, and it created this. But it was important that how it responded. And I think it's the next slide. That, you know, this was what was going on. But the next slide is obviously the genius that created. Oh no, sorry. I'm going to see if I can. Really sorry. I'll see if I can get that clip for you. It was Ortekra, obviously. That was why I was trying to get that. I'll see if I can find it for you. Never mind. I do apologise. I'll talk through it anyway. So the whole point being was it was Ortekra using the Flutter EP as a way of creating music that didn't comply with the restrictions the government had put on it. They made, I can't remember, I think the beat changed every 2 bars, so therefore it was no way it could technically be regarded as repetitive beats. I'm so sorry, go home and listen to it. It's a brilliant piece of music, Ortekra, genius. But it was also a creative response to social and cultural kind of pressure from a very conservative right-wing government. We needed those things. I think the thing people are missing so much at the moment, particularly during a pandemic and everything moving online, is that idea of the euphoric, the idea of the ecstatic, the need for ritual. You know, clubs, the reason clubs work and the reason things like that happen is because people need to find that very visceral connection with people, and we need to find that the ecstatic. It's a bit scary at the moment with sort of raves going on during a pandemic. I'm not kind of condoning those, because but underpinning it is an illustration of that desire for people to connect, for people to show ritual, for people to sort of have that connection that music provides, and nothing else really does in that way. So the communities that have come out of this is part of a lecture that I teach about club music, but you know, you've got raves, you've got Wigan Casino and Northern Soul, you've got Studio 54 in New York there, I think the Hacienda's there's Ibiza. Club culture's often provided this, it's created those communities of connection, and we really need to sort of be able to go back there and find those spaces. So I'm kind of rushing through this, but I should probably hold back a little bit and talk about this. But I think I'm trying to make sure I make these connections for you. But the most important thing is we understand what people bring to this. As we increasingly move towards a digital, don't lose what people and the movement of people and the movement of ideas brings to us. I think this is very important, and for anybody who's in England watching this, this moment in time, the debacle of what the consecutive Tory governments have done to the generation of people who came from the West Indies on this boat, the Empire Windrush, which I think it was Tilbury Docks that arrived in 1945. They brought people over to this country, Empire, and they brought people over and now are kind of booting them out and saying they're not part of that, which is absolutely revolting, disgusting, and abhorrent to me. But more importantly, we need to acknowledge what it meant when they came. This post-colonial movement, I mean, I'm referencing Paul Gilroy here in the Black Atlantic, but also people like Stuart Hall, who talked about what happened. Britain was culturally transformed in the decades that since, you know, the empire, since the Windrush. How much of our culture, our food, our sense of community, our music, our sense of ritual as well, the language, the way we dress and the way we connect has been forever changed by people who came over, and we've absorbed that. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that the movement of people is a positive thing. I come from the UK, which is an island. It's a migrant culture. We're completely, everything about Britain is about people who landed here and changed it. And I think we need to sort of acknowledge that in how we absorb it in and not reject it. And it's probably, I think it's 30 days and a matter of hours before the UK, where I am right now, is going to be leaving the European Union. And it's pulled the ladder up on, not on Europe, it's pulled the ladder up on people, it's pulled the ladder up on where it's come from. It's said that it's now not, it says it's open for business, but it's not open for people. And I think that's really wrong that that's happened, and we need to sort of bring that into our discussions. Because that's what's happening now, the migration in a globalized world. We need to sort of understand why people are doing this. We need to understand the impact of war, understand the global, a lot of it is about a global crisis, and it's also about water and food. And we need to see that, and it's important that there's creative responses. I brought in the Ai Weiwei thing, obviously he's amazing pieces with the boats that he's done, very visual, but you know, there's many ways in which that's kind of expressed in sound. This is, I won't play it, probably because it's not the link wasn't working, but this is a website that has soundscapes that are taken from, that's in Lebanon, the Badawi refugee camp. If you go on that site, if you find that website, you can go and listen to the sounds of people, the stories of people, the actual environment, the ambience of the people who are living in this refugee camp. There's loads and loads of sort of sound files. Music and sound needs to respond in a very literal way to kind of the things that are confronting it. So we should not turn our back on people and the movement of people. We should absorb it and acknowledge it. We're all human, so we've really got to bring that into how we do it. Music traditionally has been able to absorb that. It's been able to find these kind of fusions and hybrids of culture and sounds, you know, and we need to learn from that. We'll talk a little bit about technology. This is probably it's the most misappropriated quote of all time. We shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. It's always been credited to Marshall McLuhan. It's not actually Marshall McLuhan who said it. It was a priest who was interviewing him for a magazine at the time in New York. It was actually the priest who said it, but very, very prescient and very important to understanding the world in which I came from and the world in which we're living in now. And the tools in which we have now, which are digital, which do involve AI, which do involve very much kind of programming, and we need to sort of bring that into the world in which we're doing stuff. I came at the cusp of an electronic world where synthesizers and synthetic sounds were in there, but also of tape recorders, and that we use tape recorders more than we use synthesizers, in the sense that they were ways of capturing sound, processing and representing them as pieces of it, as a creative things. Those were the tools that shaped the world that I kind of started in. But on a broader front, culture, you have to accept that, you know, there's a picture here of in New York, 5 boroughs, where, you know, street parties and the use of turntables and electricity from a power source was a way of creating that ritual and creating a world in which people connected. It said so much, but technology created that, and particularly. There was actually originally a picture of, I think, Scratch Pickles DJing, because the point being is that, you know, what hip hop and what this taught us was how a piece of equipment that was ostensibly used just to play tracks on became such a creative thing, and brought on the whole idea of turntablism, of scratching, of sample culture, which Christian Marclay did, obviously, but also Grandmaster Flash did. So it was very important. And also it brought in the idea of how space was used. This is similar to how I was talking about the space we used back then in the kind of collapsing industrial space, but also changed the economics of music and the way the changing dynamic between performer and audience. Hip hop, early electro, DJ culture is really important for how the relationship between audiences and performers and what was expected both of technology and our behavior. It created whole new rituals, and we kind of have to see that and not lose that in the way we are. Also different media technologies and technologies of representation. So I'm going to come to those in a little while. Sorry, I'm firing through this because I'm aware of the time. I spoke before about, as an artist, I tend to look at means of, the media technologies of production. I talked about tape recorders there. I talked about, synthesizers, drum machines, all these things. These were my tools of creation. But I think the danger is, or the error rather, I should say, is that we've looked to try and understand the world as musicians and as artists in changing technology and production, but it's not. The thing that's changed, and the early parallels, are not the tape recorder and are not the synthesizer in terms of the way the world is now. What has taught the world that we're in now has been led by telephone exchanges and been led by radio. It's those tools of transmission that have been really important in how the world we exist now. Those are the technologies that have changed us. And those are the technologies which have shaped the world in which we are now. I'll play this, hang on. I think I've lost my mouse, but maybe if I press this, I could go, there you go. A bit of Cabs. The point being, the parallels I'm trying to find there are how at that moment in time we were using the media and using television and using film to kind of go back on, to absorb what was around us and present it back. I think that's still an important way of looking at things. And the idea now of how people use different technologies. I just thought I'd show you something from an artist called William Betts, who uses surveillance, but in a very, very different way. This is a contemporary kind of application of this. So if it will play, I think. Sorry, I've lost my cursor. Seems to have gone. Let's see if this works. Here we go.
The surveillance paintings that I started doing, I did in response to the London bombings. I noticed after the bombings, these images came out on the BBC. And
the technology's letting me down, I'm afraid, but let's see if this works. Oh, shit. Sorry, I do apologise. I'm going to try and whip it back. Damn. I'm just going to quickly escape out of this so I can find my cursor. Excuse me, everybody. Right. Hopefully, there you go. I could talk about So I apologise. Anyway, check him out. He's an artist who uses surveillance and creates paintings from it. The point I was trying to make was how those ideas and those, you know, the importance of capturing the world around us, electronic eyes, surveillance, and then incorporating them into a completely different form. Those are the things that I find seeing parallels with kind of past use and past art and current stuff. Again, the sort of, you know, the elephant in the room with this is how we function in a world in which music has become a utility. We turn it on and off like electricity or the shower, and no one wants to pay for it. And that's the biggest kind of issue that people have. It's a difficult one to actually resolve, in the sense that when we lose the object, then it's difficult to establish the exchange value of the creative process, and that's very difficult. Music has started to come almost in the same world as graphic art, of painters and illustrators, where the object is difficult to actually find exchange value. There is massive sort of surplus value in it, added value in the same way as I talked about the making of it. The creative process has to have its own value in that world, which is very difficult, because I massively believe that, you know, artists have the right to reap the rewards of their creativity. But it's a difficult one, and where I have no massive answer to it. But I'm interested in it because I work with younger people all the time who are trying to still see the model of how music worked is still the basis of it. But in a world of YouTube and Spotify and Apple Music, I'm not quite sure how it's going to work, because even though they may give extra pennies to artists, they may change the deal slightly, the rewards of the new remuneration for digital music is very, very difficult. So I'm tending to find the traction, or at least the sense, in other ways of music actually becoming a creative force. Hence, I'm fortunate enough to work with sound artists and installation artists, people who work with games and games technology, a whole different kind of approach to it, where it's not about the single, the album and those things. So it's slightly changed. Everything is a remix. The difficult thing is now in a digital world where the past and the present are all one. Everything exists. We live in a perennial time, so the past is equally accessible. Everything now is not about the new, it's about the recontextualization. It's about new forms, new understandings. I showed a Cabs clip, and I showed William Bett's stuff, which is everything is a recontextualization of what's gone before. Everything sounds familiar. What's new is the position in which it's placed, the context in which it's placed, the means by which it's shared and distributed, and the capacity for people to become engaged in those processes. We're all part in an online world of producing stuff, sharing stuff, remixing stuff, moving it on. Memes are just a way of remixing the cultural tropes that are out there. So it's all out there. I was going to go, yeah, I mean, this is the world which we kind of created. I'm not happy about it, but these are some of the apps that exist where royalty-free music, which seems like a complete anathema to me. The idea that people would be attracted to music, that you can go, I don't have to pay anyone for this. I'm just making generative music. I'm just getting generative music. I'm creating my own mood music. I'm creating music that works for me. It's great for the individual in that sense, and the creative, the doing, the verb part. It's difficult for people where there is no remuneration for what they do. So it's a rather difficult world. It's difficult in the sense that Spotify, you know, the way Spotify works and algorithms and how AI works, they're really reaching a point where they basically want to they'll probably create Spotify playlists that algorithms and AI are creating most of the music. Not literally, but it is an aspect of how music works online, and that's a difficult one to deal with for most artists. But within that, there are really interesting things that are happening with new technologies. this is a site and a thing that I've been invited to be involved in, and this is ZAT, and it's part of the University of Sheffield, which is it's created a whole load of AI produced stuff, and you can work with it, and it's actually got a sort of a lyric generator as well. So it's a fascinating world in which we're creating stuff. But I think it is about the interaction of humans and AI. I'm fascinated by the way AI is going. Some of it is very scary, and massively it's obviously going to make us redundant, so many people redundant. I was just reading this morning, this happened a couple of years ago, but there was apparently a group of, I think it was 5 young new lawyers were given a whole load of kind of legal paperwork to resolve and go through it. And 5 of them received this work. It took them I think it took them 8 hours, and they got 85% right. They gave it to an AI sort of piece of software that existed, and they managed to do it to 95% accuracy in 26 seconds. That's a bit of a worry for a lot of things. It's a bit of a worry for music, actually, in the sense that writing is very different. It's difficult for AI to sort of write, but it can actually make music in a very authentic way, because music is based, at least songs are traditionally in songs, and that's the music we're talking about here. Rules apply to it. There are formats, there are models. It's a mathematical thing in its own right, music. So therefore, AI can replicate those mathematical formulas a lot more easily than it can the emotive sort of process of writing and literature and other things. So, and probably painting as well. But it's a bit more worrying for musicians. But having said that, hopefully this will play. Yeah. There you go. So that was a piece by Holly Herndon and Jay Lynn, the artist who I'm talking while this is on, but I'll pause it for a second. But created using AI, so that's good shit that happens when AI and humans come together. Created vocal pieces, created an artificial intelligence actually replicating those voices and creating what they put into it. We're running out of time a little bit, so I'll quickly show you a little bit of this. This is a piece by Semiconductor. This is Ruth Jarman and Joe Gerhardt, who created a piece using the Super Collider, the Hern in Switzerland, looking for the God particle. This is a piece that they created using that. They were given the data to make a sonic piece, and it was an immersive piece, and you go inside it and it made the people who you know have been looking for the God's particle, people who invented the technology and been doing the experiments, they ended up in tears, I think. I don't know how much time we've got, but I'll play a little bit of this so you get an idea. Again, this is about really how we can make sound work and function in a new digital way. Oh, it's not doing it now. I've done that. Sorry. Oh, here we go. I'll move it on a little bit. So this is using the data created by the I'll move forward quickly because I just want to show you a couple of little taster bits before we finish, because I probably rambled on a little bit too much for you guys. But and again, this is Sam Aaron. This is live coding. So this is another way that people are doing really cool stuff with technology. This is actually sort of coding on the fly and writing. So this is like I'll move it on so you can hear the more upbeat stuff. But the idea being that you share the coding, people can see it. It's a bit sort of in-house nerdy, but it's actually a live set using live sort of in-house coding as he goes. So he's creating this as he goes along. That's a live coding gig where people turn up and just rock up and actually code live, and that's what they create from live coding when it's used to trigger specific drum sounds. Sorry, I'll move on. I'm kind of over the hour, and I'm conscious that I've probably driven everybody a bit crazy, but as I said, I'm kind of finishing where I started off, which was the idea of how the things from the past haunt where we are now, but also how much we need to adapt to the world in which we live. Obviously, the key to this is hauntology, and then the idea ontology and haunting. So the ghosts of the past giving meaning to the world in which we live. And in the words of Mark, Mark Fisher, who I encourage everybody to look at, how the past exists in its cultural forms and how the present is really, and it goes back to the idea of my utopia dystopia discussion about how the future in the world in which we live are the ideas of lost futures, the sort of the utopia and the fear of dystopia. That's the actual world in which we inhabit. So the past teaches us not only, but also inhabits the world in which we live. I was going to play a Wrangler piece to finish off, but I think we've run out of time. I'll leave it on there so people can see it if you want to flip on. That's a piece, The Anthropocene, which was from the Wrangler album, which came out the day lockdown sort of happened in Britain. So we managed to do 2 gigs around the release of the album, the Situation album, but then we stopped there. So I'll stop sharing my screen. I'll open things up to everybody and say thank you very much for listening. I'm sorry some of that, I apologise if some of that dragged on a little bit. I think I've stopped sharing now. And I will cut out of this. Okay, thank you. Sorry, it was a little bit rushed and a little bit mad, but it's weird doing things online. Hopefully there was a load of dots that people could join together for themselves and make sense of some of the things I was talking about. But thank you and cheers for listening.
It was really interesting. Echo, I don't know where it's coming from. Okay, and because we are recording this, and it will also available to watch it later, so people can check the links, because we can see the links from Outtake and other that couldn't work technically during your presentation, but they can check later and see what you were referring about. And while you were discussing, there are lots of questions coming, and like I will try really to be briefly on making only 2 of them, and like not to repeat with the people that I read all the questions. So we will go one by one, and then you stop at the end with the Anthropocene, which is the song from your Wrangler last album. So maybe I will refer through the music of this album for my first questions. So in the first part, you were discussing about spaces, places, and communities, and how this was functioning in the 80s, and about the protest and the riot against the many contradictions that were coming from the governments of Thatcher. So, and at Bella Union, referring the publishing house, the label that issue your album, your last album of Wrangler, there was a short introduction text in which practically to the song, which is called Machines Designed to Eat You Up, I will quote you that practically they're referring that you are practically profiting this dystopian society, starting from Gamma Voltaire 40 years ago, and now it's even more present now. And then you said, or I'm quoting what was written there, it felt dystopian there, then it feels more dystopian now. Wrangler are still questioning the power, but some of the tools of power have changed. I'm now fearful of Google in the same way I was fearful of Thatcher in the 80s. So I would to make a kind of parallel, because at that time we had embodiment of the person or the politics of the government connected to one territory imposing certain restrictions. And nowadays, with the internet and communication and 5G and social media and Facebook, we have another type of restrictions or another type of, let's say, situation to fight against, and we don't have this kind of embodiment as we had before. So can you reflect a little bit on this, how to participate in fighting against something that we cannot define who stands behind, because it's global and it's spread everywhere?
Yeah, it is a real dilemma. I'm actually going to quote Phil Winter from Wrangler, because he said the best thing about this, just, you know, off the cuff, and he went, it was better in the 80s because you could look your enemy in the eye. And it's very true, you know, you could. The thing was, it was a physical, it was a real visceral world. And so we knew it was based around that. It was based around the sort of the conflict and the tension that existed between physical kind of physical entities, but now it's become abstract. It's become incredibly abstract, and it's also, you know, it's as you refer to it, it's very global. And not only that, the people that monetize this move money around. It's not around, you know, it's not based around countries. The idea of the nation state has very much gone. We live in a corporate state in that sense, or multiple corporate states. We just inhabit one bit of territory, but our engagement is with multiple kind of states that you know, global in some respects, but also without territory in other respects. They're, you know, they're digital, they're kind of non, you know, they're not real, they're not entities in that sense. How we fight that, I don't know. Like I say, I don't have massive solutions. I just think you need to question them. I think the main thing is that people need to be able to challenge and be able to see what goes on. The thing that's scary is the lack of transparency in what we do, in what happens. We can't exactly see what's going on. I think we're really fearful because this is we're trying to hit a moving target, but not only a moving target, a kind of an invisible target. But at the same time, we also have to see these tools as not being, they're not benign, but they're not all evil as well. I think, you know, the idea that you use the tools for your own ends, I think the idea being is that we manipulate those tools, we use them in we use them in a way that undermines the sort of the market use of those tools. You know, we don't have to consume, we don't have to use the phones in that way. We have to challenge our own behaviors, and we have to sort of question our use of technology is beneficial to us primarily, rather than beneficial to a faceless corporate organization. But we can't get away from it because it's, you know, it's interwoven in our lives. You know, it's a genie that won't go back in the bottle. So we have to just be, I think awareness is the first sort of line of defense, and challenging is the second thing, to challenge the application and the use of those things. So yeah, I have hope in technology, but I have fear of technology as well.
Yeah, because practically it's part of our lives. So yeah, I totally agree that we need to think about the way how we use it. The other question goes in line about the community and the relation between the artist and the audience, or what is the artist in the digital environment. I was watching recently an interview with David Bowie. It was in 1999 from at the BBC, and he was like talking about that time, how he perceives the internet, and he thinks that, and now it's practically what is happening now. It's about demystification process between the artist and the audience that started in the 90s and now on, and that practically now the audience and the community becomes more important than the artist as such, as a person leading the, let's say, riot in quotes. So practically he was quoting the Sean that practically the arts now is creating in this gray space between the artwork and the audience, and this gray space in the middle, it's what is art is an artist in the 21st century. So what do you think about this? I mean, what is the relation now between the artist and community, or the audience, or how much the audience is important to create the artist?
I think it's become incredibly fluid. That's what the digital kind of part of it, it's made it massively fluid. Akiko, the person who directed the Anthropocene video, works with Ben. The two people who made that video were doing really mad experimental live stuff where people came into a venue and they were able to adopt characters when they were in the venue, and they were actually, I think they were using kind of, you know, PlayStation Wii things, but they became the performance. And I just think it's become really fluid and it's broken down. I think also very much things have become around the event and the space in which it takes place rather than the CD or the vinyl or the cassette that captures it. I think it's very much around the experience now. And I think art has become increasingly experiential. It's becoming more and more immersive as well. I'm not saying everything has to be this, but I think it is about that fluid relationship between the creator and the participant. And I think, you know, DJ culture taught us that. That was the relevance in talking about that, that for the first time, people went to a space, big events where people weren't looking at the DJ. They worked within themselves. So the experience started to become a bigger part of it. I also think social media has become kind of interesting in the sense that the piece of music, anything that's released, it becomes owned by a community. It becomes owned almost by social media, and the actual release becomes less important than the dialogue that takes place around it. So the dialogue becomes the event in some respects. So it's really interesting, because at the end of the day, you know, what worries me, particularly when we make music the way we're making, we're just content providers for a voracious social media that just moves on to the next thing. So I think it's just important that the dialogue that exists around something that happens, whether it's a book or a film or a piece of music, that is captured as well, because that becomes that event, that experience becomes just as important in some respects as the piece of work itself, the production itself. So it is that, you know, it's what we're saying about how people consume and receive things has become more important in some ways than how people create things, because we can all create now. So it's become more important. The dialogue that goes on around it becomes increasingly important.
Yes. So let's continue with the dialogue with the other people. We have lots of questions, so I'll go one by one. So from Mirko, the first question: would you consider listening to, let's say, Cabaret Voltaire can be Wrangler if you prefer at the moment deepfake album, since there is an algorithm and artificial intelligence that provided with all CV info can obviously create it?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, again, it's about the recontextualization in some respects. It goes back to that. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but the context that's changed is how we can create that music and we can simulate that music. It becomes an interesting kind of thing. Yeah. We can emulate those things in real time. I'm kind of fascinated by them. I've yet to go and do the work with the AI thing in Sheffield University, so I'm intrigued by that. But the thing that's important is we, you know, as artists, we have to create the thing that it's going to mimic. So you can't mimic something that hasn't already existed. So we created those elements and made what we did. Technology and algorithms can recreate it, but all our reference points come from what we made of the reference points, you know. So we talk about Wrangler, we talk about Cabaret Voltaire, we talk about any band, or it might be New Order. About the importance of them is not what they sound like, it's what they mean. It's about the message that they had, it's about the meaning that they had, which I referred to earlier. So we can remove, you know, we can actually recreate things quite easily through technology and algorithms, but the meaning they have has to be there in the first place. David Bowie exists because of what David Bowie meant, not just the music he made. It's what he represented, what he signified, the meaning, the message that he had, what he meant to all those people. So just being able to reproduce a Bowie track through an AI or algorithm technology does not create the emotive part of it. It doesn't create the personal, it doesn't create the identities that were built up around that person or the people that were all connected through it. So yeah, it's interesting, but yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Okay, he will answer. Comment from Gary Elliott: music as a utility is definitely an issue for artist revenue and survival. Okay. Do you want to comment on this? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a world I created in that sense. It's just the way it's gone. In some ways, I mean, the thing is that, you know, as kind of alternative artists, we can't have it always, in the sense that, you know, when I started out and when punk happened, people wanted to control their own destiny. They didn't want to be part of an industry. They didn't want major labels telling them what to do. They didn't want people to sort of photograph them in a way they didn't want to be. They didn't want people to put words in their mouths. In the internet, you can do all that, you know. So we got to be careful what we wish for. But in wishing for that kind of massively autonomous world, it's come about by, you know, by technologies that have shared it. I think in some ways, if it was the industry, if we look at it from an industry point of view, I feel the industry shot itself in the foot, and it missed an opportunity with Napster, in the sense that all of a sudden, you know, the sharing of files and the sharing of music was interesting, but they let that happen and they tried to fight it, which was really stupid. That's like the little boy sticking his finger in the dike. What they needed to do at that moment in time was embrace it and work with it and find a way that they could in some way control and monetize it and in some way support the artists, but it didn't really work. So, you know, once that had gone, they missed the opportunity. And, you know, the creation of MP3s created the idea of utility, and the internet meant we could shift things around. So, you know, we can't turn back the clock. That's the way it is.
Thank you. From Gordon Bass. Can technology at times hinder the community that music can build? For example, it's easier for a small group together, especially in COVID times, around a guitar or piano, for the kind of immediate shared communal experience that music can foster.
Yeah, I totally agree. In some ways, we've gone back. I remember talking to Phil. Remember Phil Oakey saying to me, this is only a couple of years ago, that, you know, the guy from the Human League, Phil went, we're all troubadours now, Mal. That's what we do. We really, you know, we've gone back to that idea of musicians, of people who work in that small way. Yeah. I mean, it was ever thus, and it's really good in some, but in some ways, that's the world in which we exist. And is it a bad? Yes, I know that it's shit that we don't make money out of it. We really do. But music's always served different functions. And so, well, people should be able to get the rewards from the music they make if people like it. But it's not just about that as well. It is about building communities and being able to use music to relate to people and amuse ourselves as well. You know, I've made music. We made sounds to amuse ourselves. We didn't, in the first place, we didn't make it to make money. We never thought we would do. We did it to amuse ourselves. In fact, we made money out of it, enabled us to do different things. That was great, but it wasn't the reason we did it.
Okay. Thank you. From Christopher Fredriksson, will culture be the winner in the post-pandemic world? Topic related to the jobs of the future, but with focus on the art-related professions. Many professions can be digitalized and robotized, but the audience wants to see human performance. They want to identify themselves with the performer. They want to think that something can go wrong. Can this represent a competitive advantage for the art professional?
Yeah. Well, as I just sort of illustrated, yeah. You know, even doing a talk can go wrong and all the bits don't work and technology doesn't work. I love the flaws in things. It's what makes us human. And so I don't mind mistakes. I don't mind things going wrong. And it's out of that which makes it real and makes it human, and it makes it about what we are as humans. So yeah, I totally understand and totally agree. And it is, you know, it goes back to that idea. It is about the experience of things. So yeah, you know, that's why festivals do. I mean, that's how people make money now. You know, the event is the product now. So big festivals or whatever, people do that on an industrial scale almost now, or they did until the pandemic. But post-pandemic, yeah, maybe we're going to be in smaller rooms. to be quite honest, most of my gigs, not many people turn up anyway, so I'm quite happy working in the small spaces, so it doesn't really worry me. But yeah, I think we got to remember why we do this and what it means, and it's about communicating, it's about messaging, it's about sharing, and it's about, I'm loath to say touching people, but it is about, you know, having an effect on people, yeah.
Yes. So again from Mirko, do you think that artificial intelligence will ultimately come on the top of Homo sapiens, as Homo sapiens came at the top of the Neanderthals? Do we have a chance of maybe finding a way to stay in the game, maybe side by side with artificial intelligence, on we're becoming increasingly obsolete?
No, I just... Murkoff, I'll tell you what to do. There's a really fun book, and he's a brilliant and absolutely brilliant writer, and he's called John Higgs. He wrote the book about how to burn a million. He wrote the KLF book, but he also writes a book about The Future Starts Here, which is a wonderful kind of exploration about, you know, the dystopian fear of machines and what they do. They can't replace humans. What we need to learn is how it works. I mean, because AI, given it can replicate certain jobs, and that's, you know, that's fine. But, you know, what I referred to before about it can't replicate what people do in literature. At the end of the day, it's a computer, and it's not a sentient being like a human being is, and therefore we will always kind of prevail. Yes, there is the fear of what it can do, but it's not the fear of it sort of becoming human. It's just the fear of what you know, the potential pitfalls are in what can happen. You know, the idea that, you know, the scary thing is once a computer starts, you know, an artificial, you know, machine learning can create other machine learning. That's a little bit weird, but at this moment in time, you know, humans there's so much about us that makes us special. It's the randomness, it's the faults, it's the kind of madness, the craziness, the unpredictability of humans that means that we can shift like that. So we're not machines, you know, it's still about the Turing test, in the sense that computers, not intelligent, but they act in a way that appears to be intelligent, and we're still at that stage. So I still have massive faith in humanity and what people can do, partly through our inherent madness.
Again, Gary Elliott, I think this is common. Same Iron Life coding, very interesting.
It is. Have a dig and have a look at that. As I say, and it's like that idea I was talking about before, where people take on roles when they come into places. I think it's interesting. There's a whole generation of people, you know, that we can see that are actually playing with this technology, and they don't. In some ways, they don't have the hang-ups that I do and the fear of my generation. And they just try things, and they come from a different world. I'm still part of that world that looks to the analog model of music, and that's kind of flawed. So I'm more interested in what's going to come next in some ways and what people are going to do. So yeah.
So after that, he continues with question: has Spotify type instant music made you think differently on how to create and share music? Has it forced you to look locked at different mediums to generate income?
It has for me, but that process for me had started before Spotify, in the sense that I didn't stop making music. I carried on making music, but I was living in Australia for a number of years, and I had to find ways to survive. You know, I've got children, I had to survive. So I'd had to find ways to adapt. And although given the choice, I would have said, no, I'd much rather be able to make music and carry on and get money from the gigs I did and the music that I released. But it didn't really work out like that. So I was forced into finding different ways of being myself, which were always creative, hopefully, and always involved music and culture and media and all those things. But I just had to find other things to do. And that worked for me. I feel, you know, I feel for people who make music and that's all they can do or all they want to do, because they should be able to do that. But for me, it didn't really, for me, it was a challenge because I became a writer, I became a radio presenter, I ran record labels and promoted and taught and, you know, did book. So I became a journalist. So I quite like the idea that I could find different things to do, but it is difficult. Spotify has changed things, although I have to hold my hand up. I don't actually have Spotify. I've got the free one on my phone, but I never use it because it's full of adverts. So I know that's really bad, but there's enough music in the world for me to kind of navigate and find. And, you know, I think Bandcamp for me is the future for that type of, for that analog model of music, of creating and releasing things and doing it that way. I tip my hat to Bandcamp for what it's trying to do for artists and musicians. It really is trying to redress the balance and bring back that traditional idea. It's difficult, but you know, that I prefer that to Spotify.
Thank you. So we will go with 2 more questions from Gordon Bass and Montel Andreevich. I think we will stop after this because it's already 8:30 and it's a very complex subject and there is a lot to talk about, to share many different aspects. And this is really, let's say, to put us in a position that we need to make another round of lecture, if not happening in the close time from now due to COVID in the physical space, let's say next year. For sure, we need to organize another online digital session. So I will go with Gordon Bass. He says, sort of like social media can be a force for good or bad.
Yeah, discuss. It's both, really, isn't it? I mean, I think it's the use of it. I think what scares me is that technology has built in this idea of the voracious need to constantly use social media to reassure ourselves that we know what's going. It makes us feel in control, social media. That's the difficult thing, because we go, I've got my identity on social media, I can see what's being said, I can see about the things I'm interested in, I'm in control. It feels as though it's a control mechanism, but the downside of that is that people are constantly on it. It's like it is an addiction in that way, media addiction. And the other thing is, I suppose that's really scary, is the way algorithms work and the way that social media works in those. We just get drawn into these, you know, people refer to them as echo chambers, this idea that we're drawn to things that we like. And the worrying thing is there's plenty of that, and sometimes we miss the other things. That does mean that, you know, populists and people who are into sort of right-wing shit just see right-wing shit, and it just reinforces their worldview. Other people who don't like that, who are kind of climate change activists or whatever, we see, you know, people see that. The danger is that it puts us in kind of social media ghettos and puts us in these sort of almost like gated communities where we just reinforce our worldview, and we're constantly reinforcing that by the nature of the technology that draws us back into it. So I'd love to say I can do this, but I can't because of all the things I have to do. I'd love to be able to say, I'd love to do a digital detox and stop doing it for a month and see what happened, you know, and see how I felt about things. See if I felt less informed, less aware. I don't know. It may help to detox on it. There is a condition that we all suffer from in a knowledge economy, in a knowledge kind of ecology, and that's, you know, it's kind of informed helplessness, in the sense that we know lots of things, we know so much, but we're kind of helpless in terms of trying to change it and use it to transform things. So we know a lot of things, but we don't feel we can change a lot of things or impact on a lot of things. And so that's the dilemma and the challenge of social media, I think.
So I now realize that Momchilo has a comment, so it's a good comment, so we will finish with this. But when I was saying just this question and a new question pop up, and this would be the last one, and it's from Stephen Dorfin, and he says or asks, do you think that the global experience of COVID-19 will harm or enhance music culture in the long term?
In the short term, it's obviously impacting it, and that really worries me in terms of the traditional sort of music economy. And I don't mean in terms of the big record labels and all that. I mean in terms of the people who work in the bars and the clubs and the shops and the people who are doing sound and the people who do merch and the people who work around it. It's a service industry, and as a service industry, it's been massively impacted by the pandemic. So I would never be flippant or dismiss what it's doing, because I can see how it's massively impacted on a lot of people's lives, and also a lot of people's lives who enjoy music, who are not able to go out and sort of do that. We're missing, as I said, that ritual, the need for the ecstatic, the need to share. So in the short term, it's massively impacted on it. And I haven't got a crystal ball, so I can't look into the future and say what it's going to do. But I think perhaps what it may do is, when we come out of this and we are able to go and see gigs, and those people do come back, and maybe we start to value it a lot more. Maybe we will value that. You know, as a case in point, in the British, you know, Brexit, which is happening in Britain, this has nothing to do with COVID, but it reflects how music is viewed by the powers that be, the government in this sense. And that is that Brexit means that for people who want to sell their products abroad or tour in Europe and all that, the rules that have suddenly been applied to them have devastated the industry. But that industry creates a lot of wealth and a lot of jobs for the UK and in Europe. But they're willing to sacrifice that over the issue of fishing rights. Now, I'm not knocking fishermen, and I'm not knocking, it's difficult, but there seems to be a misunderstanding of what we value. And I think, and it's my job to be able to say, I think that we should value what people create. We should value music, we should value artists, and we should not see them as just something that's superficial. It's a big part of all our life. So when we come out of this shit period that we're going through, I'm hoping that at least there will be a much greater understanding and appreciation and value attributed to all those people that I've been talking about.
Thank you. So the comment from Momchilo, it says it's a bit extensive, but I will read it. Absolutely amazing and super interesting lecture, Stephen, with some great points and conclusions. Artificial intelligence being quite interesting and still in its evolving development process. And of course, it's quite interesting to do some interesting experiments with sound and AI, digital arrangements, scores, remixes. Still, in my personal view, its lack of emotional intelligence is what it inhibits it to do a great digital track, remix, or its own, despite the constant improvement of algorithms and tons of data being given to it to learn. However, it's still a developing endeavor, and in time it is possible it would get there. As you say, we do live in a dystopian world, and the future does look black, but I guess what we can do is express ourselves by making music which has an interesting dance leap, funky what is this? Bleakness. Something that you do exquisitely with your music, with Wrangler, Sivi, and yourself personally, and I have an immense respect and love for it. I'm really sorry not having you today in Skopje. So yeah, I would share Momchilo closing words, and I'm really sorry. I mean, I was really enjoying the lecture, but I would enjoy even more if we were in a physical place, because this digital gives us lots of opportunities, but in the other side, I feel a bit schizophrenic because I need to also pay attention to the questions and discussing and trying to give it to you, but also hearing you what you're reflecting on, and it's a bit chaotic. So for sure, after this lecture, maybe tomorrow, I will have this glass of wine that we were discussing about before the lecture starts, and I will go through once again to pay with more attentions and have this upper level of enjoyment, not participating, but only listening to what you're saying. So thank you very much. It was very lovely. I really, I'm really happy that you were here with us today, and I want to have another occasion in the very recent time, not more than a year from now, to have another type of discussion, but not only, maybe also a performance and music hearing or a live act.
Well, yeah, I mean, I know we're just finishing off and I don't know who's out there or who's going to hear the stream later, but I just want to say many thanks to you, Violeta. You've done a brilliant job. Thanks to everybody, excuse me, and all the team behind you. It was lovely to be able to come and talk. Yes, next time we'll do it in the flesh and in a room, and it will be brilliant. But thank you for the invitation, the opportunity to chat, and I hope there was something in there that the provocateur in me, at least, I hope it's sort of sparked a few things with people. Just want to say thank you to everybody.
Thank you for everybody that were with us. So yeah, have a nice evening.
I'll message you tomorrow, and thank you. Cheers to everybody. Take care wherever you all are. Look after yourselves. Stay safe, and we'll be back stronger and better in hopefully within a year anyway. Definitely.